And welcome back to the reading of Soul Winning written by T.L. Osborn. We are on chapter 6. Chapter 6 is entitled The Notorious Mental Block. What is the difference between revival and evangelism? Or have you thought about it? Or does it matter? Revival is reviving something that had life before. You cannot revive what never lived. Evangelism is giving life to those who are dead in trespass and sins, who have never experienced God's life before. Revival is for Christians. Evangelism is for non-Christians, for the unbelieving world. Christians receive life from Christ when they believe the gospel and accepted him as their Savior. But since they have become lukewarm or may have left their first love, they may need revival. Outside the church building is the place for evangelism. This book concerns itself with evangelism. That is why we call it soul winning. This apostolic ministry has been greatly impeded by the notorious mental block that assumes that if unsaved people can be persuaded to come to a church building, then they can be influenced to embrace Christ and to be saved. So a special speaker is brought into the church. Advertisements appeal to the public to come to hear their invited guest. Announcements are publicized by radio, television, email, the internet, and through social networks. But very few unsaved people respond. Why? Because non-Christians are not interested in going to church buildings. This next section is called Outdated Mentality. But the out-of-date Christian mindset ignores this fact. Church members love their sanctuary, their freshly carpeted aisles and newly padded pews. Their choir is well-trained and they are proud of their pastor. They believe that with enough advertisement, the unconverted will be persuaded to come to their church. Singers, musicians, performers, and special choirs are engaged. The faithful ones spread the news and the welcome mat is rolled out. House to house calls are made, inviting people to hear the entertainers at the church. Advertisements intensified, but the results are still mediocre. A handful of church absentees and some dropouts attend and may be revived, but few non-Christians attend the events. The thousands are invited. Why did not more of them respond? Because unsaved people are not interested in coming to church. Someone may argue, that's a pessimistic view. We don't share that conclusion. We'll find something that will attract unconverted people to our church. So more musicians or singers or performers or speakers are scheduled. More advertisements and more promotions are scheduled. Believers are urged to more earnest prayer. Again, the church doors swing open and the welcome mat is rolled out and a precious few are persuaded to attend the meetings. Some are even converted, and those few who did get saved are worth the effort, because a single soul won to Christ is worth whatever investment is made to reach them. But in general, very few unconverted people respond. The groundwork is well laid. The believers spare nothing, but the efforts made do not bear much fruit. Faithful Christians ask in dismay, why? And here's the persistent answer, the title of the next section. The unconverted world has been trying to tell Christians something for a long time. Your pastor may have a PhD, you may have air condition your building, carpet your aisles, and cushion your pews. Invite us to your church via radio, television, phone calls, letters, church bulletins, newspapers, ads, TV, electronic mail, or personal visits. You may bring preachers, lecturers, prophets, teachers, evangelists, musicians, entertainers, or singers, but we are not interested in coming to your church. This next section is called where the need is obvious. If the testimony of Christ is only shared within the walls of the sanctuary, then the majority of the unconverted people will never discover Christ in their lives because they will not be present. There are millions of needy, despairing, lonely, fearful, unloved, neglected people who would be responsive and receptive to Christ if someone witnessed to them. They are waiting right out there beyond the sanctuary. They need salvation. They want forgiveness. They search for knowledge about God. They fear to die as they are. They are encompassed with problems and they yearn for help, but most of them will never come to church. When Christian believers go to them and give them the gospel out where they live and work and play, they accept Christ and receive his salvation. Then, with confidence in those believers who shared Christ's love with them, they gladly follow them back to their churches, where they grow in grace and in the knowledge of Christ. They know that someone cared for them, came to them, helped them, and help them to receive Christ on their own terrain. This next section is called Two Words That Count. The most timid Christian who witnesses of Christ to an unconverted person says two of the most powerful words in our language before he or she ever opens their mouth. They say, "I care." People want to be loved. They want to know that someone cares about them. There is a church whose members win more people to Christ than any other one in its denomination. The pastor asks, "Do you win people by attracting them to your Sunday school classes or to special evangelistic meetings at your church?" His reply, "No. We win almost no one that way. We live in an area of strong religious loyalties. Almost no one will visit our church. So we go to the people's homes and their workplaces to share Christ with them, and that's where we win them. Then they come to our church and become strong believers." This next section is called First to Christ, Then to Church. Most churches teach their members how to invite people to their sanctuary. First century believers focused on inviting people to Christ. New Testament Christians testified and taught people publicly from house to house, making disciples out where the people lived and worked and played. Their focus was to win people to Christ, then to welcome them to their meeting places. That concept succeeds today the same as it did in the early church. Evangelism is the grand theme of biblical ministry, to preach the gospel to every creature. As Christians share Christ with the unconverted people on their own territory, like first century believers did, they rediscover the most rewarding ministry that Christ ever committed to his followers is being his witness. There was a balance in the early church that we shall look at in the next chapter. It formed the foundation for their tremendous success in spreading the gospel across their world. And that, my friends, was probably one of the most critical chapters in the book. That's the reading of chapter 6. We'll catch you next time for chapter 7. This is Soul Winning, written by T.L. Osborn.